Okay, so this is going up probably after the last time we did one of these. I'm kind of clustering these together, and I will pre-record a few of them so that I can distribute them throughout the week, during which I will probably lose power and access to the computer during that time. So, if you're new to what we're doing here, we're random generating a NanoWrimo story. National Novel Writing Month. The month of November, first to the end, you have that time to write a 50,000 word novel. Go. That's the idea. Now, I decided that I would build a couple of random generators and generate an entirely new story as my writing project for the month. So the first thing we did was generate a genre, subgenre, type, the outline, which was in a world where blank, something blank, character of some type, blank, so on and so forth. It's the in a world of magic and mystery. The local government changes, and one child must something, 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 something. It's that sort of announcer roll up. But I made tables out of them that you can see over here on the side that you can use to generate these stories. And I created a couple of other tables that you can use. So like this is table 2, page 2 of the tables for the story outline. This is the table for the monster generation. And this is the table for the motivations and abilities of the lead characters. So if you're interested in learning what we did for a lot of that, I will point you back to the previous videos in this series. I'm not going to spend 15 minutes re-summarizing this. But what we need to do right now is come to some resolution on some issues that we had last time. So I built out the tables that were discussing the hero's 4 allies. Now I admit there have been some things that we generated that made me call into question how we're going to do this. But what we've got so far is the male lead. We rolled for the first video that didn't work. We rolled a 4-sided die. Even was male, odd was female, and we got a male lead. The second time we rolled it, when we reshot the video, rolled it again, got another 4, so it was a male lead. But here's the thing. I feel like there is a temptation on my part to rework some of that, because what we did last time in the third video in the series, I believe, we rolled up the idea of the 4 heroes who are allies of the main character, and we rolled the gender die to determine what gender they were. And we got 2 males and a female. You say, wait a minute, 4 allies, how do you have 5 characters? Well, one of the things we rolled up was that one of the allies in the story is an outsider, who are the outsider industrialists, are sort of the villainous force within this story. And we rolled up an outsider as one of the allies. But we asked the Oracle on page 2 if this was a replacement for a hero ally that we lose in the first half of the story before the setback. And the answer we got was yes and. And so our ally that we will lose, in my mind, has to be the aged monk who heals the party members and benefits them through helping them uncover their power or abilities to a greater degree. That Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of character just seems like the right choice for that. So I didn't roll that one. But what we did roll was the abilities of each of these characters. And so for that we have the monk who's a healer, the sorceress who blows wind, the noble who drinks rivers, the craftswoman who's immune to fire, and the outsider who's hard-headed. Like literally could stop swords with their head. And so we have these four, and they sort of suit the earth, air, fire, water elemental aspects that can make for an interesting puzzle story as we go forward. But the monk would be the spirit aspect of it, the healer spirit guide. But the thing we had to come to terms with was rolling up the genders of each of the characters. Now, we'd already rolled the gender of the lead character as a man anyway. We did it twice and it came up man, I think both times. It may have been, I might be remembering wrong, the first time may have actually been swapped. But, regardless of how we go forward, we rolled up 3 female characters out of 5 and 2 males. And it felt like the placement was wrong because we had a female monk, which, despite the fact that we're doing predominantly anachronistic storytelling here, where we remove it from most of the format of Chinese history and move it sort of to a parallel alternate world. Despite the fact that we're doing that with it, there's an element of the idea of the female monk feeling out of place in this style of story. And I debate whether or not the craftsperson is a woman or not. Because the hurdle I see in that one is, in a lot of this sort of story setting, many of the female characters do not get into positions of interacting with the outside world. So they're not business owners, they can't own property, and as much as we want to be anachronistic with it, there's a little bit of a story setting flavor wise that, like, the more you deviate from that pattern, the less it is Chinese martial arts fantasy and then becomes its own different thing. But there's a real big temptation for me, because one of the things we rolled up is the outsider ally that comes into play is a male. And I think it's a good contrast with the female villain. But I have some questions as to whether or not we do the idea of... Because here's the thing. We rolled up the motivations and the character traits of each of the sidekick characters. And the outsider seems to be, why would they switch sides to ally with the hero and the allies? maybe he fell in love with one of them. Because I feel like the fact that the rest of them, out of 5, we have 3 female characters. Having it, the stereotypical female character falls in love with character and whatnot. It's, I feel it's more interesting to have a male character fall for one of the female allies, and that's why he switches sides to support the one he loves, rather than going sort of another direction with that, where like the stereotypical route of the female always falling in love with characters instead of the other way around. So I think the outsider being the love motivation works. There's a little bit of question in my head about how to place the motivations of some of the rest of them. So we have the monk healer who's into art as his motivation, and his personality type is prestige and notoriety. I don't know if that's a good fit for him. And I don't know if, like, when we rolled it, we kind of paired it with the gender role of female, and I don't know that that works either, because I don't know historically that there are any real monks of the time who would be female monks. I mean, they're nuns, but I feel like there's an aspect of it that doesn't sit quite right with the storytelling format. So changing some of that up to male monk, healer, art, prestige, not sure. Could we go with purposeful commanding? Possibly. But that means we switch prestige off to the sorceress who's female, and that suits well. There were, I believe they're called Wu, W-U, female sorceresses, shaman of the time. So that works. She has the ability to blow wind and scream at volume. So that was one of the other caveats we had was I had listed the abilities succinctly, but one of the abilities from the 5 Chinese or 10 Chinese brothers that we co-opted for power sets for this type of story was the ability to blow wind and yell loud. And so there's a link to some of the shamanic practices and wind and weather. So I can see that being a work totally. So female sorceress, wind powers, and yelling. I'm a little unsure whether or not she would be prestigious. Possibly that's a fair trade. And then textiles or fashion as a motivating factor for her. Then the noble drink rivers and spit rivers. They're in hiding because the peasant uprising is one of those things where they must go hiding. Their savvy in negotiations are their motivating factors. So they're savvy to what's going on, and I think that suits well. The craftsperson, if we're going with the monk being male and the outsider being male, the craftsperson is technically, based off of how we rolled, a craftswoman. They're immune to burning, and they're crafting jewelry, and they're creative. That mostly fits. I feel like there's a question in my mind whether or not the gender is appropriate for the setting. I envision it as like jewelry working in a sense of metalworking for creating jewelry. You can heat the metal till it's soft and sculpt it with your hands if you're immune to burning. That works. I think the only catch on that for me is women couldn't own businesses or property at the time, so having one be a merchant or a craftsperson with a business, it feels like it's not quite working within the time frame that we're setting this in. And I hate that that's a delineating factor. And then we have the outsider who's hard-headed, love, and loyalty. Like, the motivating factor there for the character to be loyalty when they switch sides, I feel like is a bit of a misnomer. But we can state it as loyalty to their love interest, or loyalty is a motivating factor for them in the sense that they'll switch their loyalty for the right cause. So I think we can kind of work with it, but I'm not entirely sure. So I do think we can switch up the prestige to the sorceress and the purposeful commanding to the monk. And I feel like the monk may be the thing that changes the lead character's mindset towards fighting the villain characters. So we've kind of got that working for us. What I kind of go back and forth on is whether or not we switch up the, you know what? We could very possibly, that's not bad. So the craftsperson who's immune to burning, we could set it up so that like they're impersonating a male to do the creative thing that they love to do, which is make jewelry. That's viable. She's pretending to be a man. And that's where we first encountered that character, where their secret is exposed, and it's causing struggle and strife within their situation. But that's an interesting commentary, because I think one of the things we have for the villain is the sort of expansion of female rights within the framework of the society as it exists, is an outsider industrialist contribution. And so as the influence of the outsiders comes along, it may seem more an opportunity for the craftsperson to gain the right to be themselves. So the idea of overthrowing and fighting them might be a hard sell. I don't know. I'll have to think about that a little bit. But I did kind of come across the fact that there's another motivating factor that was art. We rolled a lot of luxury and creative motivating factors for the characters, and the way they distributed was textiles for the sorceress, in hiding for the noble. Could we do that? We could switch the noble from in hiding to textiles. No. No, 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 no. I think that's the best way to put it. So, like, the monk would be art, is where we came to. Because we have jewelry, in hiding, textiles, art, and love. Those were the influencing factors. And love is for the outsider to fall in love and be the motivating factor for them switching sides. Jewelry could be the craftsperson because they can handle the metals in molten form. The sorceress being textiles, the noble being in hiding, and the monk being art. I went with the monk being art because the monk could be making what's called, I think it's Shihan Penjing. They're essentially like little miniature terrariums of water, stone, plant life, and miniature figures making tiny landscapes. Sounds like an amazing thing to do, and I imagine it's very meditative. It's Zen gardens, but with plant life and water. So I feel like to a degree that fits with the monk. And I can see the idea of the monk working that sort of thing going and having outsiders forces coming through and disturbing their stuff and being rescued as part of that experience of connecting them to the group. We will lose the monk to death at the major conflict that results in the group breaking up and becoming easy prey for capture and imprisonment. But then we'll gain the outsider as an addition to replace the missing member. And so the art form works for that. I think one of the things we need to do now is do a roll-up of how many outsider industrialists do we have to deal with. What do you say? We roll a D... Let's roll a D20 and see how many outsider industrialist captains we deal with. Now that's not the all be-all and end-all of the forces of influence of the outsider industrialists, because I imagine as a steampunk trade organization, the incursion of their forces within the region are more substantial than that. But the captains that one has to deal with, whether they're military captains, ship captains, captains of industry, I think that having some of those villains to go after. So I'm going to roll a d20 and see what we get. 14 captains of industry. 14. That's a fair number. How many of them are on a board of... So let's roll a d12 and how many of them are in the capital city as advisors. D12. So 4 of them are on the council of advisors to the empire. So that leaves 10 captains out among the field. And there are 5 main characters. So 2 per story element. So like you can have one you encounter when you're picking up the character and adding them to the roster. And you can have another one that you have to rescue the character from. And you can do a little wiggle room, so like you could have the having one character be harassed by a character, that you defeat that character, recruit that ally to the party, lose that ally, and then find that same villain that you encountered the first time lording their capture over the person. So that's one person for both of those encounters. Whereas in another encounter, you might have one lord and 2 allies of the villain character as the obstacle for that character. So you could work a little bit of that in new ways there. So, but there's a council of 4 around the, what are we going to call, that's the other thing I wanted to roll up here. Let's do that. We pulled up a list of wuxia names. So we have a list of 10 first and last names for the wuxia style characters. I'm not pronouncing it right. I'm sorry. I'm not going to dwell on it too much. But I'm going to give you a D20 roll, and then it'll tell us which one to pick off of this list. And I won't make a standard list out of this because I think names are more complicated than this. I did an internet Google search for names for WUXIA name generator. And it came with a list of 10 names that are 2-part names, first and last concept, like enchanting lemur, first blade, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is roll a d20, and that's going to dictate the first name that we're going to pick out of this 10 and 10 list. And then we're going to do a second name on that list. 15. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Deception. 10. Glorious deception. The glorious deception is character name. So glorious deception. We'll see. We'll see whether or not we use them together or whether we split them up and mix and match. Glorious deception. Let's just spam and go for it. Let's hit the list over and over again and just see what we get. So we've got 16 and 4. So 16 and 4 would be white star. White star. That's not bad. I kind of like that. Okay, and then 3 more of this. 12 and 14. That would be blade hornet. Blade hornet. And Come on, roll for me. 4 and 14. White Hornet. White Hornet, really? There's a lot of white going on here. We got white and hornet both more than once. We may have to re-roll one of those. 9 and 1. Spring. Enchanting Spring. How do we interpret that? Would that be the river drinking, spitting noblewoman? She's an enchanting spring? Or is it the shamaness, the sorceress, the spring, the season? Okay, so white star, white hornet, blade hornet. So we'll have to re-roll that one just this time, because I think we got a repeat there. Oh, for God's sake, why is my internet going in and out over and over and over again? This is preposterous. What is the issue here? Connect to the internet, you loser. God, so insufferable. Why does the internet keep dropping out? I don't understand what's going on here. Okay, so we can't do anything right fricking now. I don't know why this is not working. I don't know what's going on here. Stop dropping the internet connection. What is the issue here? Okay, so we're going to roll again for... And just do it. Why are we arguing? 12 and 6. So 6 would be... Devouring. Devouring Lily. Good Lord, that's a hell of a name right there. I don't know why I'm showing you that. That doesn't do you any good. Devouring Lily. Okay, so... let's hit the name connections here. Come on. Why is this suddenly a problem? I don't understand what's going on. Why are we suddenly picking fights about this? Devouring Lily. So we have Glorious Deception, White Star I like, Blade and Hornet. I'm not big on the Hornet aspect. White Hornet. Enchanting Spring. So I don't... Oh, and we kind of need to know a code name for the main character too, don't we? So let's pull up I mean, we've got 6 options here already, but I'm gonna pull out Blade Hornet and White Hornet. So we're down to 4. Glorious Deception is not great either, but we'll do another round of names. So let's hit the numbers twice for this batch. 5 and 15. Unleashed. Unleashed Condor. And nine and 6. Chasing Emerald. Chasing Emerald. Okay, so we can do Devouring Lily might work for a noble woman who eats rivers. That seems moderately suiting. I feel like that could work. A Devouring Lily. White Star. Enchanting Spring. Unleashed Condor. Glorious Deception. I feel like I want to switch some of those around. Glorious Emerald. The Chasing Deception. I'm not sure that works. We'll figure it out, I guess. Glorious Emerald. White Star. Enchanting Spring, Devouring Lily. Unleashed Condor. Chasing Deception. I feel like those are kind of wrong. So we've got Glorious Emerald, White Star, Enchanting Spring, Devouring Lily. We've got 4. I feel like we could probably ditch one of them because the outsider wouldn't necessarily have a name like that. But that leaves the hero without a name, right? We could do Chasing Condor. I don't feel like chasing is the way to go, though. So the glorious emerald could be the craftswoman. Or we could do emerald deception, or deceptive emerald. Deceptive emerald would be the craftswoman. The glorious condor. Glorious chase. Unleashed glory. I feel like that's a lot of a mess, and I don't think a lot of that works. I'm not going to spend a lot of more time dealing with that naming convention. I think one of the other things we need to do for this episode is really make a note of how going forward the story structure is going to be based off of a more episodic mindset. So we're going to have these conflicts where we recruit heroes, lose a conflict where the party's split up and each is captured, and then have the rescue mission for each of the individual allies. And interspersed between them, we're going to have the backstory of the setting and how it came to be the way it is, with the uprising and the Anastasia elements to it. So I feel like it's going to be far more episodic, a storytelling. And episodes should have their own episodic arc. So you have the inciting incident, the rising action, the climax, and the end of the story. So it should be introducing the character and the status quo, which would be the ally for the episode, the status quo, the conflict that comes into place. So intro, conflict, rising action, climax, recruit the ally. And so we do that format for each of them. Or maybe we could alternate between different formats. 3-act, 5-act, 7-act for each of them. And interspersed throughout that the concept of the main character going on a sort of a hero's journey kind of concept. I may do a little looking up on story structures that are not Western style story structures to see if there's a difference in some of that we could play with. I do think that we're going to have 4 ally stories. The major confrontation, that's the setback. One of the things you want to do for each of those is do an element of how do you frame it? How do you say this? You have the scene sequel setting. So you do the action scene, and the sequel is the emotional response to the scene. So you do 5-act play. You have the status quo, the emotional and intellectual response to the status quo, the conflict of the scene, the response to the conflict of the scene, the rising action, the response to the rising action, the climax, the response to the climax, and the end of the story arc for each one of those kinds of concepts. So there's 5 elements to each of that, and that gives you 2 parts to each of that. That gives you, every piece is about 10% of that, and there's a sort of a formula for figuring out how far into each one do you establish certain trends and ideas, and how far do you carry that section of the story for percentage of the story length. So I will do a sort of a breakdown of that a little bit more probably next time, because we're 45 minutes in and I don't want these to run an hour every time I do them. So I think we'll call it here for tonight. We got a little bogged down in names. I will probably sift through these a little bit more and organize them a bit better. But I don't think my tables for generating names for characters in Chinese fantasy, kung fu, or not kung fu, martial arts fantasy, was the best set of tables to work from. So I may scramble some of that a little bit more and see what I can pull off. But for now, I will see you in the next one.